Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. For those of you that joined us back in November, you may have attended Jeff's previous presentation that was really well received. So for everyone new today, I hope you enjoy his talk. My name is Jeff Model. I'm the founder of CG Architect, and I'll be moderating today's session. But before we begin, I just wanted to quickly introduce you to Jeff for those of you who don't know him yet, and go over a little bit of the format for the webinar. So introduction for Jeff. So Jeff's has 16 years of experience in a variety of roles in the industry. He's a registered architect in the state of Connecticut, and he currently holds the position of regional VDC manager at Turner Construction. Many of you may also know Jeff as the Revit Kid, which is a worldwide online resource for all things Revit and BIM, and through his BIM After Dark community. So those of you who can see the interface, you'll see a Q&A section there. Feel free to use that at any time during the webinar to ask any questions. We'll be doing our best to answer those during the webinar. And then we'll have a short Q&A at the very end as well. But if we can't get to your question, not to worry, we will follow up with you after the webinar. And with that, I will hand it over to you, Jeff.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeff. I love doing the webinars with you because your name is Jeff too. Well, thanks everyone. Yeah, and as Jeff mentioned, this is kind of a follow-up almost to the presentation last November. If you haven't checked that out, check it out. That was heavily placed on VR and virtual reality, but this one is going to be neat. I think a lot of people will find some value in sort of getting a better understanding of how we as a construction management company are actually utilizing real-time rendering tools, including Enscape. And I do want to apologize ahead of time. So I'm, of course, luck would have it, I'm getting my roof redone on my house, and because of weather, they're doing it today. So it sounds like they're on lunch break, and so I'm hoping that they stay on lunch break. But if you hear a bunch of banging, I'm okay. I'm going to try to keep the microphone low and keep my mouth close to it. But so I apologize, but this is the world we live in, working from home, right? So. Just a quick little overview on myself. If you guys don't know, Jeff did a great introduction, so thanks for that. As far as my background, just to give you sort of a little bit of understanding of where I come from and how I got to where I am today. As you can see, I have a master's of architecture. I'm a registered architect, but I did in my past take a minor in construction management. So there's always a piece of me that understood the value and was interested in not just the designy, visual designy side of architecture, but also in the construction management / business side of it. So as far as what I've done over the last 16 years, I was fortunate enough to go to a vocational school. So I studied architecture in high school, and I actually started working at a firm in high school. So I've actually only ever held a job at an architecture, engineering, or construction firm my entire life. I think I spent maybe 2 weeks working with my father at an auto body shop, and that was it. So kind of a unique experience. As Jeff mentioned, I'm the regional VDC manager, which we'll talk all about what VDC means throughout this presentation, but it stands for Virtual Design and Construction. I'm an adjunct professor at the University of Hartford, 6 years running, which is awesome. And then, of course, as Jeff mentioned, I also run the RevitKid.com, which is over 11 or 12 years now we've been doing that. Actually, it just rolled over, I think, the 12-year anniversary, and I completely forgot about it. And then also, if you haven't seen so far, I've been hosting live online YouTube streams every week since sort of the beginning of the pandemic. So we're on week 40-something now. So check those out. It's called BIM After Dark Live. Just a little background as far as what I like to do for fun. I'm a husband and a father of one, my son Jacob. I like to fish, I like to golf, and I love Manchester United, so don't hold it against me. But that's actually a picture from last year before all the snow fell here in New England of me and my son fishing nearby. So as far as VDC and the context of this presentation, I like to use this image. I don't remember when I created this image. I've used it for many, many years, but it's a great way to sort of explain a little bit of what it is that we do in virtual design and construction at Turner. And this basically represents the typical design, bid, build process using BIM, or in our case, Revit mostly. And so as the architect, right, you start with 2D sketches on trace and grid paper and whatever, right? You're sketching and you're designing things using two-dimensional sketching. Then you create this beautiful 3D model in Revit, let's say. Then you'd spend countless numbers of hours creating 2D documents from that 3D model. Then the construction or the contractors take those 2D documents, they go out to the field and they build the 3D building from the 2D documents that were generated from the 3D model. And so as you can see, when we start looking at the what is considered the typical process of design bid build in a BIM global sphere, or a biosphere, I should say, it's not that seamless, right? There's a lot of room for interpretation and error. And so what I like to say when we're trying to explain a little bit of what we do as the virtual design and construction group within Turner is we're trying to connect the 3D model with 3D building. And I know this is not the best graphic because it says we're skipping the documents, and the reality is we're never going to skip the documents, right? And the lawyers will always have you say that, right? But the documents are obviously the part of the contract. But what we're doing is we're taking that information that was created, developed, and really the intent of your design was built into that 3D model, and we're using that now to help us build the 3D buildings in a variety of ways. And so this presentation, I sort of broke it down into three major groups of sort of examples of how we utilize real-time rendering and visualization tools to do this. And then and I'm going to sort of run through a whole bunch of real-world examples to just give you a glimpse into how this technology, the visual arts side of it. I mean, as I mentioned, I am an architect, and because of that, I love, and I've always been fascinated with rendering and visual arts and creating beautiful images out of, computer-generated images, I should say. You're going to see how it all ties together, which is really cool. So we're going to start talking about logistics and planning, which are big site images and overviews of phasing, and logistics basically meaning where's the fence, where's the porta potty, where's the entrance, the exit, these material laydown, all these things, where are those going on site throughout time. And then what a really cool part is going to be the diagrams. I think you're going to love this, and it's really just a wide variety of diagrams of how we're utilizing models from design teams and some that we've created ourselves, tools like Enscape to really communicate an array of different things. And then if there's time, we're going to jump into the virtual reality side of it. I urge you, if you're super interested, I'm going to run through it quickly because we should have time, but if you are super interested in the virtual reality side of it, you'll see some examples here, but I did an entire hour-long presentation, as Jeff mentioned, back in November on the virtual reality side of it. So a big chunk of the focus today is on the logistics and planning. And so for anyone who doesn't know what a logistics plan is or has never seen one before, maybe you've seen something like these, well, not the animation of the helicopter, but on the left-hand side, these are called construction management plans. And so these are actually required by a lot of towns and cities that we work with to before we actually build, is the submission of a construction management plan. And so usually they're narratives, very long narratives explaining phases of the job and all kinds of information that's important. But what we do is we supplement those with images. The video that you saw was actually an animation we made that showed the helicopter path based on the two tower cranes that we were putting on a job in outside of downtown Boston. So the images within a construction management plan may look something like this. And as you can see, there's a timeline at the top. They're basically just showing moments in time and in what's happening on site during those things, important pieces of it. And these are used for so many different things. They're used to explain to the city or the town what it's going to look like during this phase. They're used to talk with subcontractors about pricing maybe, or how one guy's going to be working where you're working and where he's going, et cetera, and to highlight really important things. And you can see within the general notes and the notes here, this is actually the demolition of an existing garage that's making way for a brand new building. And you can see there's a lot going on here. And what I will say, since this is an Enscape hosted webinar, is the images you're going to see, especially in logistics and planning, they are from a variety of different software, from Twinmotion to Lumion to Enscape. And what I really want to focus on is less about the software right now and more about what we're generating. And then I'm going to do a quick demo to show you how over the last couple updates, Enscape is giving us features that we did not have before in order to do images like you're seeing here within Enscape. So anyways, here's just some images as I walk through this building, just to show you an idea of what these look like. They're really just big pictures at moments in time showing things like fencing, egress, access, constructability, sequencing, just highlighting all the important pieces. And they really become the communicating piece of a construction management plan. And sometimes they even have images like this, which is directly out of Revit. And you can see it's a dimension. It almost looks like a sheet, like a construction document sheet. What we're showing here is where the fencing is going to be, what actual dimensions are going to be left over for walkways and different areas, egress paths, etc. When we temporarily take over a street for this crane that's going to lift stuff on top of this garage. And as you can see, here's a section, similar type of drawing that's showing all kinds of cool detailed information. Look at the size of that crane, by the way. This is pretty neat. We're actually building 2 levels on top of an existing garage of a new garage. And because there was an existing garage and it's precast, it's obviously pretty heavy. We had to go with a ridiculously large crane to make this happen. And so what we're showing here is just what, dimensionally how we're going to make the pad and how, what this is going to look like. Again, to explain what most people, if you talk to a contractor, they'll just spit out in words, and a lot of people don't actually fully understand or comprehend. And so what's neat about this is you can start, if you're an architect out there, which I'm assuming quite a few of you are, you can start seeing where the correlation between what we as architects have studied in school and spent our entire career sort of honing, how this can relate to the examples I'm showing you today, which is really explaining extremely complex things in more simplified visuals, or maybe in one visual. And so you can see where there's a big correlation between architecture and what we do in virtual design and construction, or VDC. Here's just an example zooming out to more like a campus type of plan, where we're showing as we built a building in the middle there and some work on the right-hand side, what the whole campus is going to look like. Some egress, access, issues like that, and then we can zoom in and we can show, more detailed logistics to the actual addition to this building. This is a YMCA down here in Connecticut, and so you can see, just to give you an idea of what these images look like. Pretty cool, right? And again, all of this is to really just show you what it is that we're trying to produce, what are the end goals that we're trying to produce, and some of the different variations that we take to get there. You can see they have a pretty similar format. But then we also, depending on the job and what's required, we also have to do maybe videos to really help explain it. The top left and the bottom left are great examples of videos that were used during presentations with members or members of the YMCA, for example, on the top left, or staff, administration, and parents for the school on the bottom left, to show them, hey, for 2 years, this is what it's going to look like when you enter the building. And you can imagine that's extremely important to people. Anyone who's ever been through a construction process, for example, maybe you had work done on your house, or where you work, there was construction happening. Without knowing these things ahead of time, right? A lot of times it's shocking to figure out, oh my God, there's gonna be a fence this whole time. I have to go this way, the noise, all that stuff. And so being able to communicate this to owners, building occupiers, stakeholders, etc., is huge. And so, that's how these tools are coming into play. You can see all of these tools here. These videos, all these videos here were Lumion and Twinmotion. You could see how real-time rendering plays into it. Not to mention the fact that they change all the time, right? As I showed you in those images before, things are changing all the time. This is just a quick example of an animation sort of highlighting the concept of prefabricating the mechanical systems in the basement of this hospital, as well as the mechanical systems on the roof of this hospital. So these are all prefabricated off-site, and really this was just more of a fluff piece to sort of show and explain our concept. Obviously they weren't dropped from a helicopter way up in the sky, but it just showed how unitizing a building and became B-roll for talking through it. But either way, as you can imagine, right? Yeah, these are animations, these are visuals. As anyone who's worked with creating architectural visualization, for example, you can see, where all this comes into play. The biggest difference is that these things are changing all the time. Literally all the time. Maybe if you're doing an architectural rendering, maybe you have 4 or 5 renderings because you're showing a couple different materials, a couple different design options. But at some point in time, that thing is locked in, quote unquote locked in, and that is the image, right? here, through the life of this job, we are constantly updating these images, visuals, and multimedia presentations to show as the job evolves. And so where real-time rendering is coming into play now, especially, is being able to quickly manipulate, change, and show these evolutions of the projects throughout time. Just a couple examples of these I wanted to show you because these are larger projects in more, I guess you could say, urban areas, for Connecticut, I should say, but more urban areas. And again, this is just an evolution of what you saw before. These are logistics plans showing different phases of a job. But a great example of how we're tying this now into real-time rendering is how we are using live models now to show this. So instead of spending the time producing videos and images and photoshopping and blue beaming the notes and or Illustrator, depending on what it is we're using, right? Instead of spending all that time in post, because this is such an rapid evolving process of the job, we're finding that the use of real-time visualization is giving us the ability to, instead of produce these, we can actually just open up live models or give our team access to the scenes themselves and be able to flip through the sequences. So now all we're doing is making sure those live models are up to date instead of spending half a day or a whole day rendering 35 images, photoshopping 35 images, and then bringing them into a Bluebeam or an Illustrator document to note up, right? So that's huge. And so I show this example and the other example because this is kind of what the old way, and now here's some example of the new way. And so as you can see, most of the examples here are twin motion, but what I'm going to do is actually jump in and talk a little bit about how Enscape is helping in this process, or new features to it. So just showing you this is an example of a live model. So you can see here, these are full on, completely orbitable, explorable live models that we can flip through. We can go back and forth between phases. You can go to any view you want, just like just like a video game for anyone not familiar with any of the software. But it's giving us the ability to now have end users interact with the models and not have to do that whole post processing. So the future of the images and videos that I just showed you is what you're seeing here, which is not actually creating any images and videos, which is awesome when you think about it, right? Because real-time rendering is getting to the point where what you see is what you get, and there's not as much quote unquote rendering involved, you can do things like this. And so this is just a roll of a whole bunch of projects. This one is actually a really cool project. This is a 40-something story building in Boston. The end scene is really impressive just because I love the way it looks in real time. But you can see the complexity of what's happening. We're showing up-down construction. We're showing sections. We're showing all kinds of stuff. And all of this is happening in a real-time model. So if I sent you the link to this model or the actual scene to this model, you would all be able to do this. You'd all be able to flip through, fly around, and do whatever you needed to see within those scenes. So super cool. And that is really sort of the holy grail of these images. So what that brings me to now is also, because of what we do, I find myself constantly trying new software, trying new technologies, and figuring out what one makes the most sense for us. And so, right now, the sort of main three that we use are Lumion, Twinmotion, and Enscape. And they've all been kind of segregated in that they all do a couple things really, really well. They all kind of have the same functionality, right? But there's some things that are better at others, and blah, 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 right? And so this is an example here of a heavily photoshopped, but an Enscape type of logistics plan. So with one of the new launches of Enscape, for those that don't know, 2.9, 3.0 is coming soon, but 2.9, you actually have some functionality that can help you create some of these larger scenes that you didn't have before. So one of the reasons we didn't use Enscape for a lot of the logistics images that I showed you is that things like large forests, I mean, you saw the context that was involved there. Those things can be kind of hard to build, especially before. They were really hard to build in Enscape because of the placement of large objects, the manipulation of them, using them within Revit, et cetera. So what I wanted to do real quickly is just show you how that can work now if you're a Revit user trying to build these larger scenes, and some tips and tricks about from some of the newer releases like 2.9. So as you can see, this this is actually a phase, one of the phases of that exact scene that I just showed you, which is it's an emergency power upgrade. So as you can see, there's ductwork and all kinds of cool stuff. And so one of the things you'll notice is that there's all these boxes everywhere, right? And so you're like, well, what is that? So anyone who's used Enscape or any of these programs, usually you have to put, right, you have to put trees, you have to put these objects, and these high poly, weird looking objects and assets, right? If I zoom in here, you could see, there's a person there in Enscape, and then there's a cone, which is fine, right? But they tend to bog down a model a little bit, and you have to manually place them all over the place. And until recently, you had to download or the placement of multiple assets is still a pretty slow process. And so that was one of the limitations that we had in Enscape. One of the really cool things, and the reason I want to show this is because it's a really cool tip, is that you don't have that limitation anymore. There's a couple of things that have been modified that make creating a scene like this really easy. So first, I should jump over just to show you the Enscape scene because it's pretty impressive. So here, right here is that Enscape scene. This is a live scene, right? So this is a live scene from the model. Okay, and you'll notice now all those boxes are trees and cars and stuff, right? And so that's one of the things that really helped us or helps us moving forward if we want to utilize Enscape for some of these larger scenes. So what that is, is if I was to quickly pick on one of these, I'll show you what this is. So you can see all these boxes. These are placeholder objects. So these are simple little components. See this here? It's called a placeholder tree, tree 2, tree 3. And then over here we have placeholder, and they're just site elements. So they're just rectangles built as a family. And then they have their own types, car, car 2, car 3, car 4. So what's really cool about this is now in the Enscape asset library, first of all, a nice thing about it too is you can actually download the whole asset library. So anyone who's used Enscape in the past and hasn't used it recently, and who's struggled with the whole scroll and wait, scroll and wait, scroll and wait, that doesn't exist anymore because there's a little checkbox here. You can see it says offline assets. That means that, as you can see, they're loading really, really fast, which is super cool, right? All right. So if I go to trees, for example, now any one of these trees, if I wanted to, I can click the little 3 dots, and there's a little button here that says link Revit family to asset. So if I click that, it's giving me an option to actually link that Enscape asset to a family, literally every family in Revit. So what does that mean? That means that each one of these tree types I have here is linked to a tree, right? One of these trees here in the assets. So I don't have to manually click this and place these trees. As you can see, I mean, look at the process right now. It takes a little while to load the asset. Once it's there, you can click it, and then you can go through. But that process was always extremely painful. And then you also have these big blobs that can be a little bit of a pain in the butt depending on what you're working. So one of the tips that I want you to take away with is simply making some sort of placement or asset that I'm using site here, so that it goes with the topo or the floor in this case. And then all you have to do is make a type, and then you could lock that thing to an Enscape asset. And so that's why instead of seeing blocks, right, when you look over here, you're actually seeing the Enscape cars. Or over here, when you're seeing these trees, I just have 3 types of trees, and I can quickly place them, and they also don't bog down my model. Granted, I'm not making construction documents out of this model, but if you are, right, you don't have to have these big high poly options. The other thing that really sort of messed with us when it came to what we do with these programs is we were limited to either Revit content or Enscape content, and it's whatever existed. So if I zoom in here, you'll notice there's these 3 big blocks sort of around here. But if I zoom in further, these guys look like them. So for a long time, and still, there's not a lot of, let's say, construction equipment in Enscape in the asset library. Let me just open the asset library again. I thought I kept it open. And so, we have these libraries, as you saw from those images. We do have libraries from all over the place of construction equipment. And those libraries come from anywhere from TurboSquid to Revit to any, a BIM object to even the SketchUp warehouse, right? And all of those things, we have libraries that are built into Lumion and Twinmotion, for example, and we're able to quickly place things like concrete pump trucks and lifts and lulls and all these random things that most people wouldn't probably care about if you're doing architectural visualizations. You'll notice though, there's a new custom assets tab. And this is super, super cool. So what we're able to do now is take some of those objects from those libraries and actually load them in to Enscape. And so if I zoom in here, this guy here, let me just zoom in a little farther there. Oh, too far. There we go. This concrete pump truck right here, and that the lift that you see in the background, right? Those are objects that were brought in directly. I didn't even make those. Those are ones that we already created for Lumion, I think, in the past. And so I was able to actually bring those in and add them as an asset. So just to show you guys, if you haven't seen it yet, how cool this is huge, right? Now, so not only are you able to bring in custom assets, but you could also even link them to other objects. So for example, if I had a Revit truck that looked kind of like this, but maybe it was just not as much geometry, I can link that to an Enscape asset, but have it look like a truck in Revit. If I have a bookcase or something random that I want to show as my Revit bookcase for my documentation, I can have it launched in Enscape and look like an Enscape asset, which is super cool. But I just wanted to show you the custom asset library or editor here, which is super cool. And so you could see this one was brought in. I think this was just an FBX or a Collada file. I don't remember exactly, but it shows all the materials. You can apply the materials, you can make changes, you can do all kinds of cool stuff. But it's super simple. You just import the geometry and apply the materials and then click save. It generates an asset, it makes a thumbnail, and then you can place it. So as you can see, that allows you to do things like we're showing here, where you can bring in assets and we can actually start building these type of scenes that honestly were not really possible to build in Enscape only 6 months ago or so. So pretty cool, pretty awesome. I hope that's those are some helpful tips. But that's some of the ways that we're starting to utilize this for those construction logistics and safety plans. All right, so let me jump back into the PowerPoint. Okay. All right. So now let's talk about diagrams. Diagrams is cool, and there's a lot of really cool examples for, especially for Enscape within diagrams. And this one's a hard one to pinpoint because there's such a variety of stuff that we do, or that we use them for. And so I'm also going to credit my crew as well for a lot of these examples. I didn't mention that before, but I didn't personally make a whole bunch of these images. There's a group of 6 of us that have put all these together. And so here's some examples of what maybe some of these diagrams could look like. And this is, this is a sequence diagram showing the construction of a scaffold platform, what we call a dance floor, being built in between. This is in between existing buildings at a museum here in Connecticut. Then once the dance floor is built, then we build the scaffolding. Then once the scaffolding is built, then we can build remove the scaffolding and build the skylight. And then once the skylight is built, blah, 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 blah. So you can see this is a series of 4 or 5 images that, again, I went through them pretty quickly. But if you sat down, I'll go backwards just so. If you sat down and just watch these images, you probably wouldn't even have to read a note and understand exactly what we're talking about. Whereas if you imagine trying to write the narrative to that process in a construction management plan, how long that would be and how hard it would be to follow. And so you can see where these diagrams and these images really shine. It's being able to show, a picture says 1,000 words in in 1,000 pictures, but you get the idea. So pretty cool example there. This is another great example of actually, we used Enscape on this one to actually show, in real-time rendering, obviously, to show just to visualize the results of a study that we did, which is it's a beam penetration study. So on this project, the ceilings, or the floor to floor, was pretty low for a new building, and there's supposed to be a lot of beam penetrations, so to speak. And so the beam penetrations weren't necessarily called out great on the drawings. We wanted to make sure they were there. There was a cost implication of these, where a beam penetration put in the fields would cost maybe $3,200, whereas a beam penetration put in the factory was maybe $1,000. And so if you do that over a couple thousand beam penetrations, you're talking $3 to $4 million worth of risk that's involved here. So what we did in this process is we actually used Dynamo to take clash locations, bring them into Revit, where you could see these blue, or these bubble gums, we call them, orbs, which basically just shows you all the clashes. And then we isolated and highlighted and looked at the locations of where the beam penetrations were shown on the design drawings, and then compare them to those bubbles that you saw there. And so pretty cool way to look at every single floor and analyze sort of where the risk is, and maybe where we need to add beam penetrations, or where we need to focus our efforts on. But what's neat is you could sell all these images, again, very image heavy. And we're using things like Enscape, you see the top image there, to illustrate that to others. And we can spin around in this live for people to see it. But another really cool example, sort of beyond something that maybe you'd think about, using a real-time program for that we're able to utilize a real-time program for. Here's just a couple images just showing, this is test pit studies. Anyone who's seen a test pit study drawing itself, like a civil drawing, knows that they're extremely time consuming to look between the test pit location, the test pit type, and all that information. And so we made these diagrams to sort of show what was the result of the test pits, where they were located, and then help sort of give everyone a key plan for it. So anyone who's seen the old way of doing this, which I guess I should have put up there first, but will know how much more beneficial this is. But I think you can see, again, graphically how this works. These are actually Revit images, but I'm just sort of setting up the idea of what we would utilize visualization for. This is just a complicated sequence of demoing an existing roof overhang and putting in a new building next to it, which is an addition. And this is just a series of images just showing the detailed phased sequence of removing structure, removing the roof, putting on the new, putting on shoring, and then continuing on the whole process. Another example here of just showing some rigging. This is a better picture of it. And so you can see here showing some orthographic views of, again, this is removal of an existing roof while temporary shoring, while placing on a new roof. And this is really just going through the sequence of processes to show someone how that's going to be built. And so this could be used to explain to our field staff that are working on the job. It could be used to explain to the actual construction foremen who are performing the job, or it could be used to explain to the designers and the owners of how we're actually going to actually build the job, right? And so there's lots of stakeholders at hand when we're doing these visualizations. Another example that comes into play all the time is underground utilities. And you can see here, this is a rendering of an existing parking lot. And underground, under this existing parking lot, there's a lot going on. And so this is actually showing, this is a 3D, a real-time rendered visualization of existing and new underground piping, ductwork, or duct banks, and so on. Not only are we just kind of showing the complexity here, these were actually coordinated underground models that were created by our subs and ourselves. But we're also showing a complex phasing. You can see there's a truck up on the top there that needs to get back to this loading dock on the top right, and that needed to stay open the entire time. So we needed to phase it so that we could do one side, then we flip and do the other side, and at all times that loading dock, which is on the top right-hand side, that was open the entire time. So these visuals become extremely important pieces to explain to owners, end users, staff, faculty, whoever, what this site is going to look like from X date to Y date, right? So pretty cool. And again, as you can see, anyone familiar with any of these real-time programs, that's what we're using to generate these images. Because again, these things are changing all the time. I'm showing you the final products or a version of them, but I can tell you right now that we've got, 10 to 15 previous versions that we did over a series of time, modifying, adjusting, evolving, and adapting. Just a little more underground, because I think this is just a really cool example of visualization and also using that tool to communicate. This is 371 underground conduits going underneath an existing or a new generator that was being placed in. It's hard to tell scale here, but the verticals on those conduits are about 12-ish feet tall. So you've got PVC conduit going up 12 feet, and we were prefabricating prefabricating the generators that were going on top of these. And so with prefabrication, you obviously don't have a really big tolerance. You need things to land where they need to land. And so we were given, I think it was like a 1/2 inch tolerance, or maybe even a 1/4 inch tolerance. So if you imagine, plastic tubes that are 12 feet tall, but they have to land at a point with a 1/4 inch tolerance, we were trying to figure out a solution to get that to work. And so we actually worked with the design team, a structural engineer, and the prefabrication manufacturer, and we developed these steel structures that were laser cut. We laser cut the holes in, and basically we said, okay, electrical contractor, you got to go out there and just make sure that your PVC goes through these holes. As long as they go through these holes, they're going to land where they need. And so this is a really cool example of, there was about 30 slides of this sequence by the end of it, of showing how that works and how it goes through it. And during that whole time, the views that I was showing them were actual Enscape views spinning around the Revit model. This is just the end product of those views. And because it's always fun to show a time lapse, here's an example of what that looked like when it was done. So you can see them digging on the right-hand side. They're digging some pads and holes, and then there's our structures. There's all of our conduit. Then there's their flowable fill, then more conduit, then more flowable fill, then more conduit, then more flowable fill. And now they're basically at their, almost at their 12-foot height. You can see there's the final slab, and then they bring in they're going to bring in the temporary, or the final, I should say, prefabricated generator boxes. And there they go. Then they go underneath. They connect them all, and they're good to go. And everything landed exactly where it was supposed to, which was pretty freaking awesome. Okay, now we got some more Enscape examples. With COVID, being an ever-present nuisance in our lives, so is it in the construction side of things, and trying to figure out how we can build projects while also maintaining safe distances and COVID safety measures in place. And so this is a great example where we use a tool like Enscape to show how we're going to do that in many different ways. And so this is kind of showing the sequence of constructing. This is actually just an office renovation. There's a floor above it. This is one of the floors here where they're keeping part of the floor open while we renovate a whole nother piece of it. And so first, we're using Enscape here to just show the sequence of the demolition versus new versus temporary walls. So you can see there's the demolition of walls. Here we're showing our edge guard containment, which is a solid wall that's going to be around all the work. Where our entrance and exits are going to be for our workers versus where the existing folks are going to be. And then, of course, pulling into COVID times now, we also have, show what type of signage and what kind of COVID measures are going to be in place, including negative air machines. You can see in the middle there. But then again, because it's real-time rendered and it's all decked out and ready for those images, we can do images like this extremely fast. So we put these as part of the package. So hey, here's the sequence from a bird's eye view, but now let's zoom in and let's look at what that looks like if you're working here, 5 days a week, while our workers are on the other side of that wall to the right. This is what it looks like for you while you're working. So that's the edge wall containment I was talking about. You can see the signage on the walls. You could see some of the Purell, for example, on the walls, and the entrance doors there. So giving everyone an idea, and here's another view of it. So you can see behind that guy in the in the back there, you can see the containment wall, as well as where. So we're showing the client, hey, we're doing all this work, but this is basically what you're going to see. I will tell you that they don't know what they're going to hear, but they know what they're going to see right now. And then this was kind of the completed office as it was. And we actually did a similar thing using Enscape for our own office. This is actually the Turner home office in Connecticut. And this was back in, May or April, or whenever we kind of started figuring out how to get back to work. And so this is just an axon view, or an ortho view, I guess, if you want to be more specific, using Enscape of a Revit model to show the overall COVID plan. So you can see we're showing where specific signage is going to be. We're showing this is a seating chart because we alternated seating days, but it's really just a diagram that was created to communicate our approach to COVID safety measures. Here's a signage plan just showing all the signage across it. And then we started again, because it's real-time rendered, it's Enscape, it's visually there. We can also zoom in and show different vantage points. So here's what the existing sort of entrance looked like, and here's what it's going to look like with the glass partition between the receptionist and the those who are walking in. Same thing here. This is what the cubicles used to look like, and then on the bottom is what the cubicles are going to look like with 24 inches of plexiglass above them. Same thing here, another view of the office running back the other way, showing before and after with COVID safety measures in place. The one thing I will say is all these 3D visualizations, so this includes you, Enscape, but Twinmotion and Lumion, we got to start putting assets with masks on, because I could tell you it's not easy to put masks on these people after the fact in real-time rendering programs. We have a mask model that we just kind of throw around and try and align. Showing showing the construction of those plexiglass partitions. Again, this is an Enscape image, just using displacement views in Revit, and then what it looks like in a rendering. So just another way to really utilize these models to communicate different things. Same thing here, just showing that that plexiglass partition in the front. And then here's a video of it. I don't know if you can hear the music. Sorry, let me. Sorry, let me just change that. There was actually music playing, and I don't know if you heard it, but I'm going to turn that off because it was really loud in my ears. Let's go again. There it is. Okay, so again, because this is a real-time rendered program or real-time program, it's pretty easy and fast to make even videos out of this. So of course we had to present this now to the entire office. We went through the plan with the management and the whole team that was involved in the COVID measures. But then we also, the idea was, let's present this now to all 160 people in the Turner, Connecticut office and show them what it looks like. You saw the mask there, almost covering his whole face. And so now we're just walking through and showing a bunch of before and afters. And these are videos rendered directly from Revit in Enscape. And so you can see this is existing. And so we'll take a pause here, and then we'll show, okay, now new, here's what it looks like with all of the COVID measures in place. And then another little panning view to show, again, here's what it looked like before, and now with these 24-inch plexiglass covers, there's what it looks like now. So pretty cool, pretty neat use of real-time rendering, and very timely, I guess you could say. So this would probably go a little bit along the lines of what you're more familiar with as far as architectural visualization is concerned, but just another use of the tools that we have, and the way that or the value that we can add with them. Another great one, and this one again this is actually fully Enscape. These are orthos, and these are all fully modeled in Revit. And this was a great timing for us personally, because Enscape just came out with a bunch of new healthcare assets, and we had plenty of them ourselves, but they had some really nice healthcare assets. And what we're doing here is we're actually helping a hospital that we work with all the time, figure out what COVID-19 retrofits they can put in place and what those might look like. And so again, narratives, working with companies, and then being able to visually show, this is what you can put in place, and this is how it might look afterwards. So before and afters of this negative air pressure room, basically going into an OR. This is just a nice little diagram that went along with a narrative that shows enlarging VAV boxes and supplying 100% fresh air. Really, this is just a B-roll to talk to a narrative. But you can see on the right-hand side, those are all orthographic views using real-time rendering programs like Enscape and Revit for the modeling. And then another interior elevation talking about some of those. Again, these are kind of B-rolls talking about O2s and all this good stuff. But these are actually fully rendered images using projects that we've had for virtual reality, for example, as sample projects when working with that specific hospital. Finally, for diagrams, sort of wrapping up, is constructability reviews. And so as a construction management company, part of what we are hired to do quite a bit of times during pre-construction is perform constructability reviews. And usually that's a process of just digging through the construction documents, and we keep a spreadsheet, and on that spreadsheet, they type down item numbers. So if you're the project executive, you might type down item number 7, is the level of the new footing to need underpinning or something like that? And then maybe you'll snip an image and keep it somewhere, or somehow you'll try to show it, but usually that's just what it comes down to. Because of the access to the models, as well as Enscape in this case, what we have happening now is those people doing constructability reviews, they might find an issue in a set of drawings, and then they'll come to us on the VDC team and ask, hey, can you pull up the model and look at this area? And so that's what we're doing here, is now we're making these sheets. You can see this one's called Constructability Review number 7. We're making these sheets and just creating quick images to explain those constructability items for that review. Sometimes we use Enscape, sometimes we just use a snip of the PDF and a quick snip of the Revit model, and that's what this is showing here. Another example here showing a quick example, or a quick bollards or bumpers for roll-offs of dumpsters. Again, random questions. Here's another example of an Enscape Axon section box from Revit, and you can see how easy it is to fly to these locations, make images and videos or images that are easy for people to understand, and again, tell the story as easy as possible. So if you were the designer of this project, for example, and this is what was handed over to you instead of just a spreadsheet, right? I think you would fully understand the question of the constructability review issue much easier and much faster. And just another quick example of a swing up door detail, just highlighting it and showing it in different ways. Cool. So we're going to wrap up with a little virtual reality. And so if you at all have followed any of my content personally, or if you attended the last webinar, what you'll know is that Enscape really where it came into play for us over the last 5 years, almost 4 or 5 years now, is really with virtual reality. You cannot beat the one-click ability to jump into virtual reality and utilize it. And so I'm going to tell a couple stories here. This is a hospital project here in Connecticut, and this was kind of this is a nurse's station, and the thought here was, hey, we need the clients to approve of this nurse's station and do an in-place mock-up, because there's going to be 8 of them. They're going to be built off-site, et cetera. And so this is kind of what it was. There's a material board, a floor plan, and this rigid insulation full-scale mock-up. Obviously, the clients were not super happy and did not want to make a decision looking at this. So then we ended up using Enscape and virtual reality, and this is actually in 2017, believe it or not, which is pretty wild. To do exactly what we were trying to do with the physical mockup, which is get approval and feedback. And so Enscape became the tool. So Revit, Enscape, and the Vive were the tools that we were using for this. And why is that? As I mentioned, its ability to go one click into VR is unmatched. The quality that you see in VR and the simplicity of getting into it from a Revit model, again, is unmatched. And so you can see here's us jumping into that space and showing you what it kind of looks like. So what that looks like for the folks in the goggles, this was an example of that same nurse's station you could see there, just to show sort of what it could look like to users as they're walking around. Anyone who's used virtual reality knows that there's a little bit of realism and shading and graphical information that can be lost going into the goggles, just based on hardware and software limitations. By our testing, Enscape was the one that looked the most realistic. We went out, we actually had the end users, the nurses, the administration, walking through these spaces and giving us feedback with the design team. And then we took those feedback and we utilized it. And that nurse's station, as you can see, it already looks a little different. That nurse's station went through about 7 iterations using strictly VR. The nice thing about it is we were able to quickly tweak it because it was just a model. It wasn't built in place. And then by the end of it, we had a model that everyone was comfortable with, happy with. We saw random things like computers, printers, all kinds of stuff in the way. And we modified based on that. And then we were able to actually build them off site, bring them on site, and then place them there. All 8 of them. Here's a before, here's an after, here's a before, here's an after, here's a before, here's an after. So, oops, that just jumped out of there. So I wanted to leave enough time for questions because I know there's going to be a ton of them. So that was just a quick example of some of the VR stuff. Like I said, I think in general, I think you can see, hopefully through the examples that I gave today, sort of the wide variety of uses that that virtual, not just virtual reality, I should say, real-time rendering technologies give us as a construction management company. So that was kind of the goal here, was using those logistics plans, those diagrams in the VR example, to really just show you the array of different things we do and how a tool like Enscape or Lumion or Twinmotion can help us do those things. So hopefully that is eye-opening for you. And I'm assuming, Jeff, you've been following questions, so I wanted to give enough time. I know it's 10 minutes left, so hope that's enough time for all the questions you guys have. So thank you for having me, and with that, I'll open it up to Jeff.
Thank you. Yeah, you had very good presentation. Really, really good. Yeah, there are quite a few questions. Interestingly, a flood of almost the same questions. So
Okay.
maybe I'll try to cover everybody's question or iteration thereof with this one question. So throughout your presentation, there were a lot of annotations and arrows and you know, kind of graphical treatments. And so there's a lot of questions asking how that was done and if it was done in Enscape.
So depending on which ones we're talking about, there's a variety. We actually, believe it or not, most of the ones where you saw annotations and highlights and arrows, a lot of that is actually done in Bluebeam, and there's a very specific reason why. Me personally, I would rather do it in like an Illustrator or Photoshop for the flexibility and the look of the final product. But Bluebeam is a tool that we use throughout the company, and everyone is familiar with without any training. Any staff member can use Bluebeam. And so by using Bluebeam to create our notes, our arrows, our fills, all that stuff, that sort of post stuff, in theory, it lets them also modify them after the fact. So unfortunately, we're still end up modifying stuff every once in a while for people who don't necessarily even want to believe that they know how to use Bluebeam. But and then before we do that, though, we usually are doing post-processing in Photoshop for things like the highlights, the fades, you know, if we do a whitewash and all that good stuff. But and then the only other thing is in the live model one, where I showed a bunch of examples and you saw the three-dimensional notation. Those examples were most likely in Twinmotion, where they have a note tool that you place in there. So the 2D stills. Oh, and I shouldn't say that, actually, in the videos themselves too. The videos were all edited in Premiere Pro. And so in there, we're doing a lot of annotations and stuff for the video animations. But so it's kind of a mixed bag. I hope that helps everyone. I'm sure there's probably questions on different examples, but the 2D stills are most likely Bluebeam, and that's mainly because we want people to be able to modify them beyond our group. The videos themselves were most likely Premiere Pro, editing, stitching together, modifying, annotating, all that good stuff.
Excellent. There was another question here too. It's kind of interesting. It's long here, but I'll try to summarize. They're
Sure.
saying, you know, you're using these visuals and graphics to try to explain the construction process, but you know, contractually, the CDs are what, you know, everybody is supposed to refer to. How do you ensure that, you know, avoid any problems by misinterpretation between the graphics and the CDs?
Mm-hmm. So I think what they're probably trying to say is the CDs are what are the design intent are based off of. So if we're showing a building as a background, and the material doesn't look correct, for example, that may be an issue, right? And so the actual sequence construction and whatnot, obviously, you know, that necessarily, you know, where the construction fence goes probably has no bearing on, or the architect doesn't necessarily care about that. And so what we usually will do on more sensitive projects, or depending on the project and where it is, you know, a lot of these things will be reviewed with the architecture team before, especially the virtual reality stuff, where we're taking their as designed finishes, submittals, approved submittals, all that good stuff. Any of that, especially if we're getting close enough to where you know, that you're in the room, all of that is reviewed with the design team long before it's showed with an owner or anyone else. And so obviously I'm sensitive to that as an architect, whereas maybe some others might not be. So but we do understand that. And so you know, the buildings, it's funny because the buildings kind of become more reference objects in those larger images, but you are right in that, you know, they need to sort of graphically be represented. Luckily, again, we are all architects, and you know, we look at the documents and we can sort of get that closer than not. But that is, you know, that is something that we keep in mind.
Okay. Another question here, a little bit around the graphics side. Any tricks to keep visual consistency between projects? So they noticed that most of your images had a similar aesthetic to
Mm.
them.
Yeah, you know what's funny about that is those are probably a series. There's probably 4 or 5 different people. So myself and probably 3 or 4 other people that did all of those images. So it's kind of cool to see how consistent they are. And so, I mean, honestly, you know, because as I mentioned, these things are so um, um, not repeatable, but they change so much that we need to put in place standard operating procedures for these things. And it's not even honestly in the beginning it was a little bit of it was making sure that visuals were consistent, but we were less concerned about visuals being consistent and more concerned about okay, we just spent 3 days putting together a set of images. We need to make sure that when those changes come, because they're going to come, make sure that they happen fast. And so things like post processing, the actual visual settings of whatever program it is, whether it's Enscape, Lumion, or Twinmotion, the light and visual settings are pretty much all the same across the board for us. We have them either built into a template or we actually just have them somewhere that we all use. And then even the post processing, we're typically only using like maybe a camera raw filter. And those settings, we all kind of have a standard default that we kind of go to. And then, if we're doing any even more beyond like a photo sketcher or an action, we're all kind of using the same one. So really, and then in Bluebeam as well, all the toolkit, we have the arrows, the notes, all that stuff is actually built into a toolkit in Bluebeam for us that we created. So it's pretty easy actually to set those up and look generally consistent. There's variations in styles between all of us. Some of us like more contrast. Some of us like less saturation, and some of us like longer shadows like that. You're going to notice a little bit, but the general feel of them will all be similar. And it's because we set up those standards, and really the necessity wasn't creating the same image over and over again. It was actually having to create that same image over and over again on the same project. So if you did a rendering for a company and every month they came back and had you update that rendering, right, you would probably want to write down all your settings for it.
Awesome. There was another question here. You'd mentioned that you used the Vive back in 2017. They wanted to know if that's still what you use and if you found anything better.
That is still what we use. Obviously, the newer version. I will say that we've been more recently we've been looking at some of the untethered, like the Quest 2, just to see what options we have for untethering and what options we have for not being hooked up to one of our machines. But as far as ease of use, ease of installation, uh, excuse me, from the very beginning, the Vive has still been our best bet. And again, so we're pretty much only using Enscape and the Vive with Revit as our VR platform, nothing else there. So we are looking into different options. And again, with COVID and what's been going on the last year, us going out to these meetings and having these big those pictures you saw where there's these big rooms of people putting on goggles just isn't happening. So we are exploring some of the untethered options like the Quest 2.
Excellent. I had a question here about the best workflow to get an Enscape render into a Revit sheet.
Into a Revit sheet. Well, unfortunately, the only option you really have is to render it as an image and place it as an image within your project. Unfortunately, so I guess depending on what your end goal is and if you want it up to date and stuff, there may be some ways to do that. But unfortunately, the only way to place it into a sheet would be to create an image out of it and then place that image into your sheet.
Okay. There's a question here. They wanted to know if Turner did both design and construction, and then curious what phase do you guys typically get involved and how much time do you spend on the visuals?
So here in Connecticut and most of Turner, we don't design. We will team up as design build with companies. We do have engineers and architects on staff as an engineering group that do peer reviews and some of the stuff. Here in Connecticut, we are strictly a construction management company with some self-perform activities, and so we do not do any designing of buildings in-house. We do, however, most of our work is GMP, which is pretty common around this neck of the woods, not design build or any of those. And so what that means is that we are usually involved pretty early, ideally hired as early as schematic design with the design team. Usually, I'd say we're usually ramped up around DD, but for the most part, we're doing GMPs, and we have input in the design based on our pre-construction processes. And that's why you saw constructability reviews as being a big thing. We'll do estimates, we'll do constructability reviews, we'll do sometimes we'll do design assist, where we'll bring in a specialist, maybe an exterior wall subcontractor, and they'll actually assist as part of the design process. But we don't do any design in-house.
Okay. New question just came in here. So do you see QR codes linked to visualizations as having a place in the future of CDs?
I mean, I think they could. I think we're at the point now where people see QR codes and they immediately scan them with their phone, which is helpful. So as long as they go to a phone-based app or an iPad-based app, something like that, you're probably your best bet. We've seen them a couple times, but unfortunately, until we start, with a more model-based approach to construction documents, for example, those 2D documents that are still such a driver that I'd rather see orthographic renderings and views on the 2D documents now, which is unfortunate because I'm a firm believer that the future is in 3D deliverables. But at least putting a two-dimensional version of the 3D, like the images you saw on the documents, is probably more worth it, because yeah, maybe Turner will be able to pop it open, but maybe it's valuable for the subcontractor to open, and he may just ignore the QR code. So maybe half.
There was an earlier question in the presentation, asking, does Enscape remember linked assets, or do you have to redo it with each project?
I believe it is. It's not project based. I believe it is Revit or Revit version based. So you're pointing to an asset library. And so I actually haven't tried on a new install or anything like that to repoint it, but I'm pretty sure all you have to do is point it to the folder. When you create a custom asset, it asks you have to point it or create a folder for custom assets. And so I actually haven't done it where I've had a refresh or an install that I had to point it, but I would assume that you can point it to the links. I'm sorry, actually, I was thinking custom assets. The links to families, I think those as well, as long as the family exists in the project, I think they're okay. But I have to confirm that and try.
I think this question was early on when you were showing the kind of placeholder images in
Mm-hmm.
Revit for the trees and cars, and they asked if you can't see the true size of an asset, how do you move it into position?
So it depends on the asset. As you saw with the cars, I kind of have them at least in the right direction. And the trees, I kind of just use the trunk as my guide. And so, yes, that's true. If you want to see the true size of the asset, then it makes sense to use the asset itself. But as I mentioned before, it's the speed of placing them, and the direction is more important. I mean, if you're in a situation where it needs to be that accurate, then you should probably use the asset, or make an asset that's similar, or a placeholder asset that's a similar size. You could even put an annotated object that is the size and use that instead or something.
Okay. Another question from early on in the presentation, and the comment was that your sites are all fairly dense, and they're wondering whether you not use photogrammetry for the existing context of your building sites.
Recently we started to we've been getting more into drones and a lot of the photogrammetry for that. Every image you saw there was completely built into a live scene. In fact, the one you're looking at here is actually a Lumion rendering from a couple of years back. And so every single image you saw there were built into either Lumion, Twinmotion, or Enscape. So all those trees, all those buildings, all the context, all of that were 3D objects in a live scene.
Excellent. Another one from early on asked, how do you guys typically show expected noise levels on a construction site?
We don't. I would say no. Visually, we don't show, but it's a good point. On a project where maybe it would be important, there could be ways to visually show that. I know there was one or two jobs that I worked on where two-dimensionally we showed on a plan a radius from the blasting zone to show some of those things, and that was how we determined sort of what houses we would need to tell about, tell them that we were blasting, and sort of that kind of stuff. But Maybe that would probably be the easiest way, is to work with an acoustician or a specialist or something to say what's the radius of the noise and the severity of it, and then be able to show that on a diagram. I could see that being a pretty cool diagram, actually.
Cool. So we're just a little bit over schedule here. So this will be the last question, and anybody whose question we
Awesome.
didn't get to will follow up by email. So
Yeah,
not to
for
worry.
sure. For sure.
Um, so this last one here is how do you encourage senior staff or owners to embrace using more 3D visualizations, diagrams, and live models? Sometimes it feels as though there's a generational gap.
Hmm. I'll tell you that a majority of my job personally is selling with management staff, or with management level and owners. But the good thing about it is, all it takes is one experience, one positive experience that they have with this type of stuff, and they're sold for life. And that's the helpful part. So yeah, sometimes there's a hurdle to overcome. But a perfect example is we did a presentation that for a hospital group, a large, the management of a hospital group, and it was a scene like this. It was a pretty large scene in downtown New Haven, Connecticut, and they actually presented it. We created the plates for them to present the construction sequence sort of in a large picture, and that they've complemented it twice on newer jobs, that process, and now they're gung ho about it. And so it's a balance between being able to initially sell the idea to actually do it, and then once you do it, making sure that it's an experience that they won't forget, and that in general is how this has grown to where it is today. It's the folks that it's pretty obvious to see, and I hope everyone here saw, these are extremely large, complex projects, but how powerful these images were in explaining that. You could almost have flipped through this without me speaking and almost get a sense of what's happening in some of these images. And that I think is the key selling point, is whether you're showing other examples, if you haven't done it with them, or whether you have it with them and you could sort of show the example. I mean, it's no different than if how do you sell yourself if you haven't built a house, as a residential architect. Sometimes you got to figure out how to sell that experience to someone ahead of time.
Thank you very much. So that was the last question. I want to thank you for your presentation again,
Awesome.
another awesome presentation. Um, quite a few people have asked during the webinar whether or not this is recorded, and yes, it is. And a recording link will go out to everyone about 24 hours from now. So just keep an eye on your email for that. If you don't get it, just send an email to webinar@cgarchitect.com, and I'm happy to get that over to you. So thank you everybody for attending. Thank you, Jeff, and hope you
Awesome.
guys all have a great rest of week.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. I appreciate it.
Bye-bye.